At 3:49 a.m., a call came into Chesterfield County Dispatch. The voice on the line was frantic, trembling but clear enough to make out the words, "My neighbor's at my door. She's bleeding. She said someone shot her boyfriend." Within minutes, emergency services responded to a quiet cul-de-sac in central Virginia, one of those suburban zones where porch lights hum through the night and mailboxes are identical. But that morning, an image shattered the uniformity. A woman, barefoot, blood-soaked, crawling across the driveway, trying to stay conscious. The officers who arrived first documented a male victim found deceased in the living room with multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and neck. A handgun was not recovered at the scene. The victim, later confirmed as 33-year-old Lawrence Howell, was lying in what paramedics described as a controlled collapse posture, suggesting he may have turned toward the shooter before impact. Beside the front door, smeared blood indicated the direction in which the surviving female, Sarah Federico, dragged herself after the assault. She was unresponsive but breathing when paramedics loaded her into the back of the unit. 2 bullets had entered her torso from behind, with spinal damage suspected. She was airlifted to VCU Medical Center, where trauma surgeons immediately prepped her for emergency spinal decompression. She had been approximately 17 weeks pregnant. There was no sign of forced entry, no valuables missing, no visible point of exit. That, according to the primary on-scene investigator, was the first problem. Nothing about the scene indicated panic, he wrote in his initial report. Whoever pulled the trigger came with intention, and they didn't need to search for anything. Physical evidence, initial findings, entry points, all windows locked, no doorframe damage. Footwear impressions, partial tread found in the backyard mudline, unidentified brand. Ballistics, 4.45 ACP shell casings recovered near the living room coffee table. 2 lodged in drywall, 2 spent. Residue, GSR, gunshot residue, later confirmed on a section of kitchen counter. No matching fingerprints on the shells. Security system, inactive. Sarah's Ring camera had been disconnected from Wi-Fi. The media didn't get the story until 12 hours later, but when they did, it ran under standard headlines. Man fatally shot, pregnant woman injured in Chesterfield home invasion. But internally, law enforcement rejected the term invasion. There was no break-in, no theft. This wasn't a robbery. And based on timing, entry, and the lack of noise reported by neighbors, whoever committed the shooting knew exactly who they were coming for. Victim background summary, as of initial report. Lawrence Howell, male, 33, non-criminal history, employed at a tire distribution warehouse in Richmond, known to be in a relationship with Sarah Federico since May of that year. Sarah Federico, female, 30, LPN, licensed practical nurse, recently divorced, 17 weeks pregnant at time of shooting. History, domestic violence protective order filed April 2018 against ex-husband. Expired July 2018. For the first 24 hours, there were no arrests, no suspect named, but by the time detectives reviewed the ER physician's report, one sentence stood out, one that deviated from neutral medical language. Entry wounds on the survivor's back are consistent with execution-style positioning. Investigators began cross-referencing Sarah's cell tower history, residence access logs, and prior complaints. The pieces weren't obvious yet, but they were moving. There was no question this wasn't random. The question was, who would plan it this cleanly? In one of the early briefings, the lead investigator commented quietly, "Away from the press. The crime's too contained. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem." They were about to find out how deliberate it really was. When detectives pulled Sarah Federico's protective order from the court archives, it spanned 6 typed pages. Filed just 4 months before the shooting, it documented a series of escalating threats, veiled intimidation, and a vehicular incident that hospital records later corroborated. The order expired in July. The shooting occurred in late August. From a procedural standpoint, reviewing the petition became a priority. Line by line, investigators logged entries, dates, behaviors, specific language used by the respondent. No mention of physical abuse, but multiple notations of surveillance behavior, control over finances, and one alarming accusation, that she believed her husband tampered with her brakes after an argument about her pregnancy. Detective Monroe, one of the leads assigned to case coordination, noted the pattern in his internal summary. Respondent used indirect threat strategy, controlled access, isolated victim, increased pressure when separation occurred. Victim terminated cohabitation on her own. No recorded police visits during marriage, but statements imply premeditated psychological destabilization. Sarah had left voluntarily in April 2018. Friends confirmed she moved into a rental in the same county. Within 2 weeks, she began seeing Lawrence Howell, a former coworker. That detail would become critical, not because of the relationship itself, but because of what it potentially triggered in someone watching from the sidelines. The Department of Family Services had no open cases involving Sarah, but a background check on her prior residence showed several calls made by neighbors about domestic arguments in 2017. No police reports were filed, no arrests were made. Detectives visited the home Sarah shared with her ex during the marriage. The current occupant gave permission to review garage contents left behind. One item flagged immediately, a wall-mounted security DVR system, outdated but still intact. The hard drive had been removed. They logged the item as evidence, noting serial numbers and identifying it as a brand discontinued in 2015. Detectives requested a purchase record from regional retailers but noted the challenge. Without the drive, recovery is non-viable. Intentional data wipe suspected. That same day, investigators issued a subpoena for cell tower pings from all phones registered to Sarah Federico, Lawrence Howell, and associated known contacts from the 72-hour window surrounding the attack. The request returned a high-confidence match. A device registered to an individual with ties to Sarah had briefly entered the signal zone near her property just 34 minutes before the shooting. The same device had been dormant for 2 hours prior and dropped offline 11 minutes after emergency responders were dispatched. The tech report noted, device deactivated from source, not powered down. Manual signal masking suspected. Burner device not ruled out. Investigators moved to isolate the SIM metadata, cross-reference tower sectors, and locate nearby surveillance logs, particularly traffic light cameras and neighborhood security systems. One partial match emerged. A silver sedan, low profile, exiting Sarah's neighborhood at 3:40 a.m. No tag information, no visual on driver. But the timestamp aligned within 60 seconds of the cell phone signal drop. Separately, financial records provided by Sarah's bank showed unusual withdrawal activity from her joint account despite her separation. 3 ATM transactions were logged in the 2 weeks prior to the shooting, none made by her. The withdrawals were made from a branch adjacent to a gym used regularly by someone closely linked to her previous address. Surveillance footage from the ATM was requested. Whether it could still be retrieved depended on how fast the branch archived tapes. The digital forensics unit flagged a different anomaly later that week. Lawrence Howell's phone had received a blocked call 11 minutes before the time of death. No voicemail. The number wasn't in Sarah's contacts and could not be traced to a registered subscriber. What stood out was the duration, 6 seconds, and the fact that Howell had opened his front door exactly 8 minutes later, based on smart lock data recovered from the interior app logs. The working theory began to take shape, not from direct evidence, but from orchestration. The shooter didn't break in. The door was open from inside. Someone had likely lured Howell to answer it. Whether that person was recognized, trusted, or simply unexpected remained unclear. But from a tactical perspective, it fit a profile. Precision, familiarity with the home's layout, and a timing pattern that matched prior behavior observed in stalking cases. Detective Monroe commented quietly during the second case meeting. She thought she'd left it behind in April. What she left behind was waiting. The autopsy for Lawrence Howell was conducted less than 48 hours after the incident. The report, labeled preliminary but comprehensive, documented 5 gunshot wounds, 3 to the torso, 1 to the left shoulder, and a final fatal round to the neck. No close-range stippling was observed, confirming what the scene already suggested. The shooter had fired from a mid-range position, likely between 6 and 9 feet away. The angles, entry points, and projectile depth painted a clear trajectory. Howell had turned to face the source when the first shots were fired and had likely attempted to retreat when the final round struck him. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as immediate due to upper spinal cord transection. The next shot was clean, controlled, and indicated a shooter with experience handling firearms under stress. Howell never stood a chance. What stood out most wasn't the number of rounds, it was the precision. There were no defensive wounds, no missed shots on walls or furniture that might indicate panic. The shooter knew where to stand and when to fire. It wasn't just execution, it was execution by design. Meanwhile, crime scene technicians re-entered the home once Sarah Federico had been stabilized and relocated under medical protection. With no forced entry to examine, attention shifted to trajectory modeling. Investigators employed a laser grid alignment, mapping the line of fire angles from the spent casings on the floor to the projectile impact zones in the wall and ceiling. The results confirmed a fixed firing position near the living room entry. No movement, no deviation. Every shot came from a stance rooted just past the interior threshold. The shooter had stepped inside, waited for Howell to turn, and fired in a calculated sequence. Entry pattern was vertical, not arced, indicating the shooter fired while Howell was upright, and again once he collapsed. Investigators then retrieved data from the home's smart lock system. While no external camera footage survived due to the disabled network, the lock logs had not been scrubbed. At 3:33 a.m., the front door had been manually unlocked from the inside. It remained open for 14 seconds before locking again. 9 minutes later, EMS was called from the neighbor's phone. That window, 3:33 to 3:42, became the working timeline of the attack. Detectives ran an evidence overlay, laser model, plus smart lock timecode, plus projectile path. The composite pointed to a consistent narrative. Howell had likely opened the door himself. The shooter hadn't broken in. He'd waited for Howell to let him in, or at least partially expose himself. Then, from just over the threshold, the shots were fired in a controlled burst. The gun was equipped with a suppressor, confirmed later by the absence of audible gunfire reports from any surrounding home, despite short distances between properties. Inside the hallway leading to the kitchen, forensic techs recovered a single partial footprint, light dusting on tile, size 11, consistent with a men's trail boot. The pattern was disrupted by a smear consistent with blood transfer. Analysts concluded it was made post-shooting, possibly during exit. Separate from that, technicians located a set of glove marks on the interior handle of the back door. Nitrile texture, no prints. The door was closed, locked from the inside. The glove pattern indicated the handle had been grasped and then released without turning. On the living room coffee table, crime techs recovered a shattered ceramic mug with partial lip print residue. It had belonged to Howell. Based on the cooling temperature of its contents and estimated time of death, he had been sitting casually, not in alert, only minutes before the incident. Detectives hypothesized that he had either just arrived home or was preparing to sleep when the shooter arrived. The question remained, what caused him to open that door? With no signs of struggle and Sarah incapacitated in the rear hallway, it was unlikely she had let the shooter in. The smart lock app was installed on Lawrence's phone. Detectives now turned to his screen activity logs, hoping to confirm whether the door had been opened remotely. What they found was even more specific. The door was unlocked via manual override. Lawrence Howell had opened it by hand. That raised another problem. If he opened it willingly, he must have recognized the person on the other side. And if he recognized them, why hadn't he raised his voice, warned Sarah, or shown any sign of a fight? Detective Monroe noted this in his summary file. There's no break-in, no pushback. Howell was calm enough to drink coffee and open the door without hesitation. That suggests familiarity. That's what makes it dangerous. The ballistic evidence, coupled with digital access logs and behavioral indicators, now pointed in one direction. The shooter didn't just know the house layout. They knew the people inside and knew exactly when to strike. The timeline established by forensic and digital evidence placed the attack between 3:33 and 3:42 a.m. Within that 9-minute window, a man was killed, a woman critically wounded, and a life-altering trajectory set in motion. At this point, the investigation turned to the next logical priority, verifying alibis of all individuals with a documented connection to either victim. The most immediate person of interest was Sarah's ex-husband. Not because of any specific confession or forensic trace, none existed yet, but because his name had appeared repeatedly in Sarah's 2018 protective order, and his behavior post-separation had raised flags. He had been served the order but never arrested. It had expired quietly. When interviewed, he claimed to have spent the night at his mother's home, roughly 20 minutes from the crime scene. He did not own a vehicle registered in his name, and none was visible in the driveway during the interview. The mother, Wendy, confirmed his presence in the home the entire night. No other corroborating witness was named. Detectives ran a data pull from nearby license plate recognition, LPR, cameras positioned along the primary access routes into Sarah's neighborhood. At 3:12 a.m., one reader captured a silver sedan with no front plate traveling southbound near Midlothian Turnpike. The make matched a 2012 Chevrolet Malibu. The same vehicle was observed exiting the area at 3:40 a.m., within a mile of the shooting location. No match was found in the DMV database. Rear plate unreadable, front plate absent. Investigators contacted local scrapyards and auctions. 3 days later, a tow yard flagged a vehicle matching that description, impounded after being found abandoned behind a warehouse. The rear license plate had been removed. The vehicle was processed. A forensic sweep revealed a set of partial palm smudges on the interior driver's side window. No fingerprints lifted. Wiped clean. However, vacuum debris pulled from the front passenger footwell yielded a small flake of ceramic glaze later confirmed by lab comparison to the broken mug recovered from the Federico residence. The correlation between the mug fragment and vehicle interior positioned the car and its occupant at the scene. But a stronger forensic link was needed. Investigators then requested a geofence warrant covering all anonymized devices that had entered a 2-block radius around the residence between 2:30 and 4 a.m. The data returned was filtered for common travel corridors and signal behavior. One device stood out, disconnected at 3:41 a.m., same as the previously flagged tower ping in Chapter 2. The warrant for that device's metadata returned a subscriber trail that led to a prepaid burner SIM purchased 2 weeks earlier. Store security footage of the sale showed a male subject wearing a hooded sweatshirt and COVID-era face mask. Not enough for identification, but investigators had a timeline, a probable device, and now a vehicle with physical trace evidence. During this same period, digital forensic teams subpoenaed activity records from the mother's home Wi-Fi router. Their objective? Identify whether the ex-husband's phone had connected to the residence's network during the time of the attack. The answer was definitive: no. His device had not been on the network after 1:12 a.m. It did not reconnect until 4:23 a.m. That left a 2-hour gap. When confronted, both he and his mother insisted he had simply fallen asleep on the couch and left his phone in another room. The timeline didn't support that story, and law enforcement wasn't the only party raising questions. An internal memo from the Chesterfield County Prosecutor's Office summarized the problem. The subject claimed to be home. The digital footprint shows device absence. The vehicle matches witness capture and links to evidence at the scene. The mother's testimony is unsupported. We are past coincidence. Investigators also began reviewing statements made by Joseph, the subject's brother. At this point, Joseph had not been arrested. His responses were neutral and limited, but one thing stood out. When asked if he had seen his brother that morning, he answered, "He was probably still at Mom's, I assume." A non-committal answer where certainty was expected. That phrase, probably, became a pivotal detail, not in proving guilt, but in dismantling the alibi. Law enforcement operates on confirmable facts. In this case, there were too many inconsistencies, too much missing data, and no third-party witness outside the family structure. In towns like Chesterfield, it's common for families to circle wagons, but investigators had no intention of building a case around assumptions or guesses. They needed a break, something beyond circumstantial layering. That break would come from inside the county jail weeks later. The case took a hard turn on day 31 of the investigation, not through forensic evidence, but through surveillance from an unexpected angle, inside the Chesterfield County Jail. The suspect, now in pretrial custody for unrelated firearm possession violations, had been under standard monitoring protocols since intake. Initially, no red flags appeared in his call logs or behavior. He made routine phone calls to his mother and brother, kept a low profile with other inmates, and filed a request for court-appointed counsel. Nothing about his conduct stood out until correctional staff flagged a pattern. During a review of non-privileged recorded calls, a staff member in the intelligence unit noted recurring code words, time-stamped across multiple conversations with 2 contacts, one listed under his mother's landline, and another linked to a cell phone number registered under the alias C. Triculis. The conversations didn't reference the shooting directly, but terminology like wrap it up, clean handle, and backdoor them before they're called raised immediate concern. Audio clips were turned over to investigators. Within 24 hours, a joint task unit from the County Sheriff's Office and Commonwealth's Attorney's Office initiated a covert review of all jailhouse communications tied to the suspect. What they uncovered shifted the investigation from a double shooting to an active murder-for-hire conspiracy. On multiple recorded calls, the suspect discussed a plan to erase problems before they speak. The intended targets: Sarah Federico, recovering and still expected to testify; her father, Edward Grove Sr., and her brother, Edward Jr. The rationale was simple and cold. They were the only people who could place motive, history, and behavior patterns in front of a jury. The contact C. Trikulis turned out to be Constantine Trikulis, a longtime acquaintance with a low-level criminal record involving controlled substances and obstruction. Surveillance confirmed that Trikulis had recently visited the suspect in jail, where conversations were limited to common areas and observed through glass. In one call, Trikulis was instructed to use the same guy from before and to make it happen while she's still sitting down. Investigators interpreted this as a reference to Sarah's physical condition. She had not yet regained full mobility following her spinal injuries. To validate the threat, detectives secured a warrant for Trikulis' cell site location data and financial activity, a withdrawal of $800 in cash from a convenience store ATM, aligned with a phone call timestamp that referenced dropping the retainer. Simultaneously, the suspect's brother, Joseph, had been in frequent contact with both the suspect and their mother. He had no criminal record, but his name appeared multiple times in coordination logs between the parties. When questioned, he stated he didn't know anything and had only been asked to check in on people. To move from suspicion to formal charge, prosecutors needed direct cooperation. They offered Trikulis a limited immunity deal in exchange for cooperation and recorded testimony. He accepted. Trikulis confirmed the plan. 3 hits, staged as accidents. Sarah was to be targeted first, with a staged overdose via tampered medication. Her father and brother were to be ambushed at a shared mechanic shop, using a weapon disguised as a break-in tool. The reason for the precision wasn't just personal, it was strategic. According to Trikulis, the suspect believed that if Sarah survived long enough to testify, the motive narrative would be irreversible in court. "She's the chain reaction," he had said. "Break the chain." The murder-for-hire operation had reached the point of logistical planning. Routes had been scouted, surveillance photos were exchanged, and payment structures were discussed in coded language. None of it was encrypted. All of it was recorded. The plan had not yet been executed. That gave law enforcement time to intervene. Over the course of 48 hours, protective custody was arranged for Sarah and her family. Arrest warrants were issued for Trikulis and Joseph Federico. Trikulis was apprehended without incident. Joseph attempted to avoid service, but was located through a traffic stop and brought in for questioning. In interview, Joseph denied participating in any plot, but admitted to hearing them talk crazy. His phone, seized under warrant, contained one text message that prosecutors would later describe as the linchpin. "She's still talking. Might need to finish it for real this time." The arrest came in sequence, not by coincidence, but by design. Joseph Federico was booked first. He was taken into custody without resistance during a late-night traffic stop outside of Henrico County. A sealed indictment named him in 2 felony counts: conspiracy to commit capital murder and obstruction of justice. His phone, seized at the scene, was entered into evidence. Investigators already had the text. They were looking for more. Within 12 hours, the arrest warrant for Wendy Federico, mother of both Joseph and the primary suspect, was unsealed. Detectives served it at her residence. She was terminally ill at the time, undergoing treatment for stage ivory cancer. Despite her condition, the Commonwealth's attorney authorized charges based on recorded calls and evidence of coordination with both sons. She had not pulled a trigger, but she had participated in plotting how to ensure no witnesses survived the upcoming trial. One of the phone calls recovered from jail surveillance showed her saying, "If she talks, everything's gone. You don't recover from that." That phrase, alongside coded language from multiple sessions, formed the foundation of the case against her. She was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and attempting to solicit a hit on Sarah Federico. Due to her medical condition, Wendy was remanded to house arrest under strict monitoring. She would not live to see trial. The public release of the indictments was immediate. Press briefings confirmed what the community had suspected, but not spoken aloud. This was not just a domestic shooting. It was a long-term, multi-party plot to eliminate a witness, one that involved close family members operating as co-conspirators. Prosecutors used the press release to deliver a strategic message. There would be no leniency for familial loyalty turned criminal. The language was pointed. This was not a case of emotional overreaction. This was planned, structured, and executed with tactical precision. Detectives now pivoted their focus toward trial preparation. The core goal was to preserve and present the evidence trail in a manner that connected forensic data with motive and intent. Each step, from the front door smart lock log to the jailhouse wiretap, had to be independently admissible and collectively overwhelming. Internal strategy memos emphasized minimizing reliance on testimony alone. Sarah's safety, while stabilized under protective custody, remained a concern. She was willing to testify, but still undergoing physical therapy. Her ability to withstand prolonged cross-examination was uncertain. The prosecution began building the case as if her testimony might be lost. To shore up the digital evidence, analysts reconstructed a timeline of calls, messages, and movement patterns from all three defendants. Cell tower records, license plate reader logs, and ATM transactions were plotted against jail visitation records. One key moment stood out, a 22-minute overlap where both Wendy and Joseph spoke with the suspect from separate phone lines, less than 48 hours after the murder-for-hire plan was initiated. Neither conversation was coded. Both were evasive, but overlapping time and topic patterns confirmed dual participation. The final confirmation came from financial logs. A wire transfer of $400, sent from Wendy's bank account to a third party with no documented relationship, was labeled errand. Investigators connected that recipient to a known associate of Trikulis. The payment had been routed through a prepaid card activation service, typically used to mass transfers from institutional banks. It wasn't the amount that mattered, it was the timestamp. It landed within 3 hours of the conversation where Wendy had agreed to move forward. Investigators now had timing, motive, method, and money. Each element reinforced the others. As the indictments mounted, public reaction turned sharply. What began as a shocking domestic shooting had evolved into a complex, premeditated attempt to erase a survivor and all those connected to her. There was no mystery anymore, but there was still a trial to build. Jury selection began on a Tuesday morning under strict court order. The case had already drawn significant local attention following the murder-for-hire revelations. Potential jurors were questioned extensively on exposure to media coverage, personal opinions on domestic violence, and their ability to remain impartial. The process took 3 days. 12 were seated, with 4 alternates. The trial was held at Chesterfield Circuit Court under Judge Lynn Bryce. The lead prosecutor, Assistant Commonwealth's Attorney Valerie Brown, opened with a direct summary. The state would show that this was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a deliberate, premeditated execution, followed by a coordinated attempt to eliminate the surviving witness and her family. The prosecution structured their presentation around evidence, not emotion. First, they laid out the crime scene data, trajectory modeling, ballistic evidence, and digital entry logs. The smart lock data from Sarah's home was critical. It showed the exact moment the front door was opened, the short delay before re-engagement, and confirmed no exterior tampering. This supported their core argument that Lawrence Howell had opened the door voluntarily, unaware of the threat. Next came the cell tower records and geofence warrant results. Investigators used high-resolution mapping software to reconstruct the burner phone's movement. The data placed the device within 40 meters of the crime scene between 3:32 and 3:41 a.m., the exact time frame of the shooting. Defense counsel attempted to challenge the tower triangulation margin of error, but the presentation was consistent. Combined with the surveillance footage of the silver Malibu exiting the area, the timeline was nearly airtight. The jury heard from forensic experts about the ceramic flake found in the suspect vehicle. The glaze and base composition matched the broken mug recovered from the victim's home. The state emphasized that the fragment wasn't circumstantial. It was particulate evidence transferred by force, embedded in vehicle carpet. From there, prosecutors moved into motive. This phase relied on prior legal documents, Sarah's expired protective order, text message records, and key witness testimony from the jailhouse wiretap investigation. Recordings were played in court with redactions approved in advance. The suspect's voice, unmistakable, could be heard referencing tying up loose ends, and she's not supposed to talk again. The most damning audio featured discussions between the suspect and Trikulis. The jury heard clear references to payment transfers, victim location surveillance, and preferred method of silencing. The court allowed full admission of the wiretaps under Virginia's single-party consent statutes, since the communications were initiated from inside a monitored correctional facility. Sarah testified on the 4th day. She entered the courtroom in a wheelchair, accompanied by federal marshals. Her testimony was factual, concise. She recounted the protective order, the threats that preceded it, and her decision to leave. She described the night of the shooting in clinical detail, hearing the front door open, the sudden burst of noise, and the moments before she lost sensation in her legs. Her credibility was not contested. Defense counsel limited their cross-examination. During court recesses, the jury remained under partial sequestration. The press maintained respectful distance, but the tone of public coverage shifted. This was no longer a story about a custody dispute or spousal tension. It had become a case study in escalation, manipulation, and systemic failure. The defense offered no alternate theory. Their strategy focused on the absence of direct eyewitnesses to the shooting and the assertion that jail recordings had been misinterpreted. They produced no forensic experts of their own and called no witnesses. Closing arguments reflected a plea for reasonable doubt, not exoneration. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit capital murder. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. The suspect showed no visible reaction. The sentencing phase opened 42 days after the jury verdict. Prosecutors requested the maximum penalty available under Virginia law: 2 consecutive life sentences for first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit capital murder, along with an additional 43 years for attempted murder and firearms violations. The judge granted the request without modification. The courtroom remained silent as the sentence was read. The defendant stood motionless, staring ahead, neither reacting nor acknowledging the bench. The legal outcome was final. There would be no parole. Joseph Federico was sentenced separately. The court acknowledged his role as secondary, but emphasized the gravity of conspiring in a murder-for-hire plot. He received 15 years with no opportunity for early release. Konstantin Trikoulis, having cooperated fully, received a suspended sentence of 12 months with supervised probation, per his agreement with the prosecution. Wendy Federico passed away before her trial. Her death closed her case file, but her name remained in the public docket, a permanent record of her involvement in planning an execution against her former daughter-in-law and her own grandchildren's family. No additional charges were pursued against the remaining Federico family members. Investigators had exhausted their leads. The conspiracy was considered fully contained. With the legal process complete, attention shifted to Sarah. She had not returned to the courtroom after testifying. Her doctors advised against it. She remained under care for partial paralysis resulting from spinal damage sustained during the attack. Her condition was permanent. Sarah gave no public interviews. Instead, she issued a written statement, released through the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, thanking the investigation team and acknowledging the trial as a form of closure, but not recovery. She was raising her son alone. His name, Lawrence James Howell, was chosen in memory of the man murdered in her home. Medical reports confirmed Sarah had regained partial movement in her right leg through intensive therapy, but she would require a wheelchair indefinitely. Her daily life was structured around physical limitations, but she had adapted her nursing background to support others, joining a peer advocacy program for survivors of domestic violence and testifying behind closed doors in legislative sessions aimed at reforming Virginia's restraining order protocols. The case prompted internal review by Chesterfield County law enforcement. A policy revision was issued regarding expired protective orders, including an alert system to flag re-engagement risks for repeat offenders, even after orders lapse. The review also identified missed intervention points, particularly regarding digital surveillance data that could have signaled a pattern of stalking. In law enforcement debriefs, the lead investigator remarked plainly, "What happened in that house didn't start the night of the shooting. It started when nobody took a threat seriously because it wasn't loud enough yet." The case became part of regional training for forensic interviewers and victim services, not because of its brutality, but because of its escalation, subtle, procedural, and preventable. It was a reminder that not all violence begins with fists or ends in a single report. In the final filing notes, prosecutors added a remark not common in criminal cases. This was a conviction not only for what he did, but for what he was still planning to do. Sarah never sought publicity, but her story began appearing in case study materials, state agency training, and internal workshops. She continued therapy. Her son turned 3. A copy of his father's photo remained on the kitchen counter. The crime had ended with a conviction, but survival for Sarah became a process without a finish line. I didn't survive because I was strong. I survived because the people who tried to erase me underestimated what justice, real justice, can look like when the system finally listens. If you're watching this and you've ever felt trapped, unheard, or like walking away isn't enough, let this be proof that silence doesn't protect you, and speaking out might save more than just yourself. We've talked about evidence, courtrooms, and consequences, but here's what still matters. How many red flags did we normalize before someone pulled a trigger? How many threats go unreported because they come wrapped in a familiar voice? If this story resonated with you or made you think about someone in your life, share it. Leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from, or tell me what part of this story stayed with you. If it didn't connect with you, I want to know that too. What didn't work for you? Your voice helps shape how we tell the next one. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. These stories aren't just headlines, they're lessons, they're warnings, and sometimes they're hope.